Welcome back, Changemakers. Today we're actually continuing our conversation from last week that was about player scales. So last week we talked about the person scale, the group scale, and the community scale. These were all about how you can go from playing as one person all the way up into larger groups until you formed an entire community and you're just running that. This week we're going to continue and talk about territories and nations. These are the last two of the player scales, so they're pretty large. Last week we also used the Black Panthers as our example for understanding how you can go from a person up to a community, but they never made it to the territory or nation scale, so it doesn't really make sense to continue to use them as our example. So instead we're going to go a little further back in history and talk about Civil War story. We're going to be talking about Bleeding Kansas. So, a brief introduction to territories and nations. Territories are unique in that they're the only truly transitional scale. A conversation about territories is always going to be about how they are trying to become a nation. They're trying to be recognized by their peers. They're trying to become stable enough that they can become a nation. They can build that economy, they can be stable, they can do all of that stuff. Meanwhile, nations are all about already being stable. It's about issues that are bigger than themselves. It's about getting their friends together to all come together and solve a really large scale problem. Nations are sturdy and trustworthy. It's part of why they're the only scale that where it makes sense to be able to use money as a valid form of trade. This on its own is a whole other video. For now, it's just important to recognize that nations are the highest scale. You can't, anything bigger than that is just another form of a nation. A Bleeding Kansas reenactment would be a great way to show the power plays that were happening between the free soil states and the slave states during the Civil War era. So at this time period, there were a lot of states that formed the Union and a lot of territories that were all trying to join. In order for a territory to become a state, they needed to be promoted by an already existing state, and they needed to pick a side. Are they going to be free or are they going to be slave? It's important to notice that that wasn't a law. They didn't have to pick a side. It was just how the politics were playing out. Was you needed a balance between free states and slave states, and the only way to do that was to let them come in and set up to one free and one slave every single time. This became really important for the whole Bleeding Kansas story. Backing it up, Missouri came in with Maine. Maine was a free state, Missouri was a slave state. And that was a bit tough because we weren't really sure where things should be lining up. So they created a line, the Missouri line, and the Missouri boundary line. And everyone below that line was going to come in as a slave state, and everyone above that line was going to come in as a free state. And it mattered a lot because immediately following that, we had Kansas and Nebraska, which would have both come in as free states and would have set the power balance and skewed it. So nobody wanted that. But Kansas really wanted to come in as a free state. So they went back to popular sovereignty, which was the general consensus of how they should be coming in anyways, and it was up to the votes. Well, Kansas already knew they wanted to come in as a free state. There was a lot of internal struggle about that, where people would be like, I'm not really sure if I want to be a free state or a slave state. But it escalated really quickly. Missouri got worried because they were the ones who were promoting them. So they sent in a bunch of people from Missouri to commit voter fraud in Kansas and get Kansas to be voted as a slave state. This resulted in 200 deaths in the Kansas territory, and is often called the preamble to the Civil War. So it's a big deal. To be able to use this in the ChangeMakers system, we would probably need a large group so that we can properly show all the involved parties. So you'd have a small group that's the states, the already recognized states. Those would be playing in a nation scale because they're established, they're trusted amongst their peers, all of that. And they would be even further split up into two parties of free and slave. That's a touchy subject, so we're going to touch on that in a moment, but let's keep moving. The rest of them would be territories. In order for a territory to become a nation, they need to be promoted by another state, and they need to pick a side. So why would they need to do that? They're probably building up their economies. They're trying to become free of their own. They're probably associated with some states already, and then they have to become their own thing and become their own small nation, which is really how states work. They are small nations within a large nation. That's why it's called the Union. This becomes tough. They can't build an economy or anything like that until they can start trading with other groups. They cannot trade with states. States can only trade or ally with other states, which makes sense. You don't really want to trade with somebody who's untrustworthy. You don't really want to ally with somebody who's untrustworthy. So you only ally with other states. So in order for a territory to become a state, they need to be stable enough that at least one person trusts them. States, on the other hand, are busy solving external problems. They're probably running low on resources, and they need to talk to territories to build those resources and get them running, turn into states so that they can keep moving forward. So, walking that back a little bit, again, with the free states and slave states are definitely a touchy subject. It'd probably be tough to run the story and still have the same feeling that you're trying to get of why they were doing this in the first place. So, nobody wants to be a slave state today. I hope. And so I don't think running the story as free and slave states would work very well. Alternatively, you can make them more vague, something like the green and purple group, or if you still want to have some semblance of an identity or something to stick to, you can do something like whoever is the biggest at the end of the day, at the end of the session, gets a pizza party or an ice cream party, and that's how you run that story. This is usually covered in session 0, which is an already established thing that a lot of RPGs tend to do, where you're talking to your players and understanding what kind of lines and veils you can have. Is it okay to have slavery? Is it okay to recognize that a state is a slave state, but you don't really talk about what that actually means, which would be equivalent to saying it's off screen, or do we just not want to talk about that at all? Is this a story about, do we just want to not talk about it and have it be pizza and ice cream and it's a lot easier to talk about? All of these options are fine depending on the players. It's just important to be able to sit down and talk with them about it. Session 0, again, can be a whole other video that we would hope to be able to talk about, but later. That is all we have to say for this week. So next week, we are going to be talking about rules light versus rules heavy systems, and kind of identifying what ChangeMakers is as one of those, and our opinions on what those mean. If you like what you saw this week, you want to know more about next week or whatever, you can like us and subscribe to us on YouTube. We also have links to Facebook and Twitter in the description. We also have, you can email us. Our email is in the description as well. And you can even ask to join our newsletter. I would love to see what kind of stories you guys have for what you think a nation or a territory would be. Sorry. And kind of what other stories are interesting to you guys. That's all we have. See you next week. Bye-bye.